We were talking last week, I think, about the overall structure of the Rosh Hashanah Musaf, the Malchuyos, the verses of kingship, Zichronos, the verses of remembrance, that God remembers the good deeds of our forefathers, and Shofarot, the various verses about Shofar, both connected to the Shofar of Matan Torah and the Shofar of the final redemption, and the Shofar of Tekiat HaMesim, meaning Shofar has all of these different components. And I don't remember, forgive me if I'm repeating something, there is a thought from Rabbi Abbahu that the three sections of the Musaf correspond to what he considered to be the three fundamental principles of Yiddishkeit. Rabbi Abbahu wrote a book called Sefer HaIkarim, and unlike the Rambam who enunciated, are we okay? Unlike the Rambam who enunciated 13 principles of faith, thank you, Rav Albo says there are only three fundamental principles of faith: the existence of God, the concept in one way or the other of a reward or punishment system for vice and virtue, and the third is divine revelation of God's will through the Torah and the like. So Rav Albo says Rosh Hashanah is the day of coronation. It is the day in which we reclaim Hashem or recoronate Hashem as Melech. And on the day of coronation, we want to affirm the fundamental principles in that relationship. So Rav Albo writes, Malchiyot is about recognizing that there's God. God is my king. God is my sovereign. Zichronot connotes reward and punishment, because God remembering, which is a metaphoric term, means that there's a notion of a record of past deeds and misdeeds. And shofarot is connected to Matan Torah, where the shofar was blown. So therefore, the Malchuyot, Zichronot, and Shofarot correspond to what Rav Albo considered to be the three Ikarei Emunah that we are affirming on Rosh Hashanah. Again, as you know, the Rambam did it in 13 principles, but Rav Albo made the argument that many things that the Rambam regarded as ikarim, fundamentals or roots, he really considered to be anafim, branches or derivative principles. Again, let me give you a concrete example. Let's assume a person did believe that there's ultimate reward and punishment, but denied physical resurrection, which is it's not a position without logic, meaning who cares about the body? The main thing is the soul. There's Gehenna and there's Olam Haba, and who says there has to be physical resurrection? What is the status of such a Jew? According to the Rambam, such a Jew is technically a heretic because he is denying an axiomatic dogma of Judaism called Tekiat HaMeitim, which is the 13th principle of faith. By the way, fascinatingly enough, the Rambam himself was accused of not believing in physical resurrection, and he had to write a letter in his defense. It's very, very funny, because the Rambam is the one who enumerates physical resurrection as a fundamental principle, and there was some very, very serious doubt whether he himself believed in it. And I have to admit, maybe I shouldn't be a little cynical, even after reading his letter in which he states how much he believes in it, I think one is left with a great deal of doubt whether that's really the case. So putting that aside, at least according to the words of the Rambam, a denial of physical, bodily resurrection is a denial of a fundamental principle of Judaism. According to Rav Albo, Tekiat HaMeitim is simply a corollary. It is a derivative. It is an aspect of a reward and punishment system. So even if I am ignorant or I disbelieve a certain aspect of the reward and punishment system, that does not qualify me, in Rav Albo's view, as being heretical or outside of the fold. At most, I would have a mistaken belief. But mistaken beliefs are not heretical beliefs. Rav Albo would consider Tekiat HaMeitim to be an anaf, a branch, rather than a root. Now, again, what I'm saying is actually a fairly important point. Some people will paraphrase Rav Albo's work as if he says he didn't believe in physical resurrection. That's not really what's going on. Rav Albo believes in everything that the Rambam believes in. It's really a matter of classification. Is it ikar or is it anaf? So Rav Albo would admit, if I deny physical resurrection, I am making a mistake, but it's a non-heretical mistake. And that's important for apikoris, all of those different things. Let me give you a more radical example. Let's assume somebody believes in the corporality of God. One believes that God has a body. One believes that God has hands and feet. And, the old statement that, God is not some old man with a long white beard sitting on a throne. Well, in the book of Daniel, that's exactly how God is described. God is described as a man with a long white beard sitting on a throne. I mean, that's a pasuk in Sefer Daniel Mamish. So the Rambam explains, and this is mainstream Judaism, that these are prophetic images, these are pictures, these are metaphors. They represent spiritual ideas. So the Nevi'im may have visualized physical representations of God, but those were simply mechanisms by which they process certain messages. This is I would say it's the mainstream understanding of Judaism, but there were people who took these descriptions very literally, and they basically said God has, or at least can have, physicality. In some ways, one could argue that that's a very logical position. It goes back to the old story of God's omnipotence and God's infinity. If God can do anything, then why can't God have a body if he wants? You're telling me God can't have a body? How could you say God can't? That's the old genre of questions. Can God commit suicide? All of those issues which are, the old issue, if God can do everything, can God kill himself? If God can do everything, can God make an object that's too heavy for him to move? These are called omnipotence paradoxes. It's a little branch of philosophy that goes over these things. What's the joke? The joke is God goes to a doctor and says, lately I've been making objects I can't move. He says, am I less omnipotent or am I more omnipotent? I can't figure it out. But okay. Anyway, sometimes I get, I often get critical email, but once in a while, this was a critical email somebody sent me, but he put in a good joke, so I want to give him, I'll give him credit for that. Yeah.
Himself in the Torah does use various parts of it.
No, right. So let me just remind you that when the Rambam wrote the Moreh Nevuchim, when the Rambam wrote the Guide to the Perplexed, it originally was written as a very long letter, a book-sized letter, to a student of his, Yosef ibn Aknin, who was confused by the physical descriptions in the Torah, such as hand of God, eyes of God, and the like. And the Moreh Nevuchim, it branched out into all sorts of other things, but the original purpose of the Moreh Nevuchim was to explain biblical physical descriptions of God as metaphors. In fact, Chelet Aleph of Moreh Nevuchim is essentially a dictionary of Tanakh, in which the Rambam goes through physical expressions and he shows what they mean metaphorically. Now, let's imagine, however, that somebody took them literally. So according to the Rambam, even if the person is Torah observant, the person is from, he would be an apikoros, he would be a heretic because he's ascribing bodily functions to God. According to Rav Albo, corporality of the divine is a theological error, to be sure, but it is not a heretical error. It is simply a misunderstanding of biblical verses. And indeed, let me point out, on that particular point, even the Ravid, right, Rav Ram ben David, is the very acerbic French rabbi who constantly argues with the Rambam. If you look at the Mishnah Torah, every few paragraphs you will see the Ravid kind of criticizing the Rambam, sometimes in very strong terms. Sometimes the Ravid will say, if you don't have a good answer to your question, why do you ask it? Or the Ravid will say, you wasted a lot of paper on this one. But on this particular issue, when the Rambam says anyone who believes God has a body is a heretic and does not have a share in the world to come, so the Ravid says, A lot of people better than him had that belief. Now, again, because they were misled by the literal meaning of biblical verses. Now, again, let me point out, the Ravid is not disagreeing with the Rambam. The Ravid himself says those who give God a body are making a mistake. He's not disagreeing, but he's simply giving an excuse to those who have been misled by biblical language. So, as a result, once again, Rav Alba would say, the incorporality of God, the lack of a physical body, is not a fundamental principle of Judaism. It is a belief, but it's a non-heretical issue. It's an anaf. It is a branch, not an ikar. So as I say, so the Rambam has 13. Rav Alba breaks it down to 3. This is actually an important thing to know. I mean, I don't want to get into this so much, but because sometimes there are people who are Torah observant Jews, but they may have some trouble navigating the actual 13 principles of faith. It is important to know that within the theological world of Judaism, there are alternative formulations. In fact, many of you might be familiar with the very interesting, somewhat controversial Professor Mark Shapiro, who is an Orthodox Jew. He actually is an Orthodox Jew who has ordination. His specialty is kind of the intellectual history of Jewish movements in halacha and in philosophy, and he writes very, very interesting books and also very interesting blog posts, which later become books on the Svarim blog, which is one of my guilty pleasures. And he wrote a whole book showing, on the Rambam's 13 Principles of Faith, showing how many traditional sources differed with a lot of them. And what's interesting about the book is he did not draw on academic research. He did not draw on those who reject Judaism. His sources were exclusively drawn from the Rishonim that all religious Jews accept. Okay, that's very important. Obviously, if you're going outside Orthodoxy, you can certainly find plenty of people who deny the 13 principles of faith. But he wasn't going there. He wasn't trying to show that. That would have been an obvious point. He was showing within the received tradition of halachic Judaism, there were many who differed on many, many details. And actually the most famous is actually Rav Yosef Albo himself in the Sefer Hoikarim. So I think it is important, although we commonly talk about the 13 principles as the basis of Judaism, but it is important, at least for teachers, to be aware of the alternative formulations, because that way students could find a home, a comfortable place where they could still be situated as Torah observant Jews. Okay, but be it as it may, going back to Rosh Hashanah, the Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros correspond to the 3 Ikarei Emunah. Malchiot is Mitziut Hashem, Zichronot is the reward and punishment system, and Shofarot reminds us of Matan Torah, and therefore on the day of coronating the Almighty, we affirm our mission statement to actualize and realize in our own lives these 3 fundamental principles of faith. The format, as I said last week, is the same in all 3 brachot. You have a peticha, you have a poetic introduction. You then have 10 verses of kingship, and the way it works is 3 Torah, 3 Ketuvim, which are all from Tehillim, 3 from Nevi'im, and the last verse is Torah. Those are the psukim, and so in Malchios, the psukim deal with Hashem as king. In Zichronos, they deal with Hashem remembering the good deeds of our forefathers, and Shofarot are dealing with Matan Torah, but Matan Torah and Tekiat Hametim and Mashiach, because their shofar has many, many symbols. And after the 10 verses, you have a chatima, you have a conclusion that has a bracha, and as you know, we blow shofar after Malchiot, after Zichronot, after Shofarot. We blow one of each sound, which I'm going to develop a little bit now. Okay, among Hasidim and many Sfardim, they actually blow the shofar not only in the repetition of the Amidah, but even in the silent Amidah. It may be a little shocking the first time. Actually, I've never been at a service that did it. But it is a little shocking, I imagine, the first time, in the middle of a silent Shemona Esrei, all of a sudden you hear the shofar being blown, and obviously people are in different places in their Amidah, but the way it would work is the Baal Tokeya is next to the Chazan. They kind of daven together, and when the Chazan in the silent finishes Malchiot, he'll give a thing, and the Baal Tokeya will blow, and then they'll continue with Zichronot and with Shofrot. Now, that's interesting because if you do that, you actually have much less to blow after the Amidah. And I'm going to go over that a little bit. I want to talk about the idea that everybody knows, a bottom line, that we're supposed to sound the shofar on Rosh Hashanah 100 times. Now, just to be sure you know how we count it. The way we count it is Tekiat counts as one sound. Shvarim counts as one sound. Okay, that's the way we're counting it. Even though it's Shvarim counts as one. And Trua also counts as one. You know, it's 9 sounds, but it counts as one. So when we count 100, remember, all Tekios are one. Every Shvarim, the whole Shvarim, 3 Shvarim is one, and 9 Truas are one. Okay, that's how you count it. Now, if you do that, you wind up with 100. Now, I want to explain how you get to this, because historically, the mitzvah of shofar has a very fascinating evolution. Basically, we started with 9, and I want to show you, where do you go? How do you get from 9 to 100? That's more than tenfold increase. Okay, here's the way 9 works. Min ha-Torah, you have to blow a tekiah, a trua, a tekiah 3 times. So d'oraisa, if you would walk into a shul, let's say 2,500 years ago, you would hear tekiah, trua, tekiah, tekiah, trua, tekiah, tekiah, trua, tekiah. That's it. So the service would be much shorter in those days. So stage 1 was, and again, the concept is, what is tekiah? Tekiah is a straight, unbroken sound. Trua is a sobbing sound, a crying sound. And as the Balatanya explains, Trua represents the broken heart of the person who is crying to God over their sins and seeking repentance. And we come to God with a broken heart and an awareness of our unworthiness. But, the Balatanya writes, that broken heart has to be bracketed with joy and simcha over the privilege of serving God. And therefore the tekiah connotes the notion of joy. The trua connotes the notion of brokenness. And therefore, yes, on Rosh Hashanah we come before God cognizant on one level of our unworthiness and our desire to do tshuva, but at the same time joyous and happy in the blessings of God. And indeed, the tshuva process itself is very joyous because it gives you the chance to fix everything that's broken. A great thing. I remember, when I visited my dear son in Baltimore, a Surgetic student, go from all the way back. So he has a puppy, or he had a puppy then. This was a number of years ago. And I had left a jacket on the chair, and it was a low, the jacket was hanging low. So as puppies like to do, the puppy chews. So the thing was totally chewed off. Really, it was kind of destroyed. So in America, you can't go to a tailor and get things. They don't fix things. You get a new thing, you throw it out. So I figured, okay, I'll take it back to Eretz Yisrael. I'll go to Mea Shorim. I'll go to a poor neighborhood, and they fix things, they mend things. But even I was embarrassed. It was so badly damaged. I was even embarrassed to ask the tailor to fix it. I got this thing here. You probably can't fix it. He says, why can't I fix it? Of course I can fix it. And he told me words in Ivrit. Ma she'efshar lekalkel, efshar letaken. Anything that you can destroy, you can fix. Now, these are actually words from Rav Nachman of Breslov. And that's the whole message of tshuva, that if you can mess up, you can make it good. You can make it good. So tshuva is a paradoxical idea because we're crying and we're sobbing, but we have that joy. Okay, but to go back to shofar, and the Baal Tanya says that's why the trua, which is the broken heart, is bracketed by the tekiah. So once again, the oraisa, you just got to do it 3 times. Tekiah, trua, tekiah, 3 times. That's stage 1. Stage 2, yeah.
Why 3 times?
Well, it depends what you mean by why. If you're asking me how we know, the reason we know 3 times is because in Rosh Hashanah it says the word trua twice, one in Emor, one in Pinchas, and then by Yovel it also mentions trua, and Chazal have a Gezerah Shava of Chodesh HaShvi'i, so that's why we have 3 times. Now, that's the source. If you ask me why 3 times, I'm not sure I know. According to the Zohar, it's very connected to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It's connected to each particular blast brings down a specialized suchutz connected to the avos. But that's a complicated Kabbalistic explanation. But the source is, as I say, the 2 by Rosh Hashanah and the 1 by Yovel. Okay. And Yovel is blown on Yom Kippur, besides the Rosh Hashanah mitzvah. Okay. Now, stage 2 is a rule of the Mishnah. We don't know exactly how old it was. Obviously, it predated the Mishnah, in which Chazal wanted your tekiah, trua tekiah, to be connected to the malchuyos, sichronos, and shofros. So, d'oraisa, you have to blow tekiah, trua tekiah 3 times. So Chazal wanted to position it where you blow one tekiah, trua tekiah after malchuyos, 1 tekiah, trua tekiah after zichronos, 1 tekiah, trua tekiah after shofaros. Again, let me remind you, at that stage, there was no shofar blowing before Musaf at all, at all. There was no shofar blowing after Musaf at all. There was no concept of 100 kolot at all. All you did was 9. In the earliest stage, the 9 was not even connected to tefillah. In the Mishnaic stage, they connected it to Malchiot, Zichronot, and Shofrot as a way of calling out to Hashem to bring our tefillot l'shamayim. Now, this halacha of blowing al seder habrachot, this is what this is called, blowing after the Malchus, Zichronot, and Shofrot, it was only a takkanah for the tzibor. It was never a takkanah for a yachid, which means the following. If I am davening at home, biyechidot, COVID or whatever the reason would be, I don't go to shul, so I do say Malchiot, Zichronot, and Shofrot, and I do have to hear the shofar, but I don't have to blow the shofar or hear the shofar al seder habrachot. Al seder habrachot is only a tzibur obligation. It is not a yachid obligation. Even if you blow in the silent, that's only b'tzibur, not b'yachid. I say this because I remember, actually, I once saw a man, a very, very fine man, who was davening for whatever reason, Musaf, after the congregation. He was davening b'yechidus, and he actually had a shofar in his hand, and as he got to Malchios, he blew, and so again, a very fine man, a true tzaddik, but this happened to be a mistake. This is, you don't do that. You don't blow the shofar as a yachid. Okay, so stage 1 is 9. Stage 2 is still 9, but you do Malchios, Zichronot, Shofrot. Okay. We now come to stage 3. And stage 3 is our first quantum leap. And this is the time of Rabbi Abbahu. Rabbi Abbahu is an Amora. He is after the Mishnah. Rabbi Abbahu is a Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Abbahu made a takkanah. And here is the background. I had said, this is where it gets a little confusing. I had said that the oraisa, you have to blow a tekiah, trua tekiah 3 times. And a trua is a crying sound. But the problem was, there was a machlokas among communities. What type of crying sound a trua was? was a trua of the Torah. This is a little confusing. What we call shvarim trua, meaning groaning, elongated groaning, followed by whimpering. Ay, 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 ay. Or was the trua a shvarim sound, just krechsing, ay, ay, ay? Or was it just whimpering? Okay, this is a little confusing, meaning the Torah says you got to blow a trua. But the trua of the Torah took 3 different forms. In some communities, it was shvarim trua. In some communities, it was shvarim. In some communities, it was trua, what we call it trua, which actually means at a time when you were doing 9, what you would actually hear may depend on the community you were in. In some communities, I would hear Tekiat, Shvarim, Trua, Tekiat 3 times, and that's it, and that's it. In other communities, I would hear Tekiat, Shvarim, Tekiat 3 times, and that's it. And in some communities, I would hear Tekiat, Trua, Tekiat 3 times, and that's it. That's before Rabbi Abbahu. Rabbi Abbahu made a takkanah. It's not clear what his authority was. It's interesting. He was not on the Sanhedrin, but he made a takkanah that was accepted in OUIsrael, that on the day of Rosh Hashanah, we don't want there to be differences among Jews. We want there to be unity. We want there to be consistency. We want every Beit Knesset to do the same thing. But we don't want to prefer one thing over another thing. We don't want to say this is the right one and that's the wrong one. So as a result, we now have to do 3 of every combination. So, if the Oraisa, you would have had 9, meaning Tekiat, Trua, Tekiat 3 times. Rabbi Abbahu says each one of them has to be 3. So you have to blow Tekiat, Shvarim, Trua, Tekiat. So let's say after Malchios, right? After Malchios. Now again, we're so used to the Tekias before Musaf that our mind automatically goes there. Remember, there were no Tekias before Musaf. We're only talking about in Musaf. So after Malchios, you're supposed to blow a Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah once. After Zichronos, a Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah once. After Shofaros, Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah once. After Rabbi Abbahu's takkanah, in which all 3 types of truos have to be incorporated, what do you now have to do? After Malchios, you blow Tekiah, Shvarim, Trua, Tekiah once. Tekiah, Shvarim, Tekiah once. Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah once. That, right? And the same thing after Zichronos. And the same thing after Shofaros. And the abbreviation should be familiar. Hopefully most of you know this already. Tekiah, Shvarim, Trua, Tekiah is abbreviated Tashrat. The Tuf is Tekiah. The Shin is Shvarim. The Resh is Teruah. Why is the Resh Teruah? Teruah begins with a Tuf. Answer very pashat. Because since Tekiah begins with a Tuf, in order to differentiate the Tekiah from the Teruah, when it comes to the Teruah, we use the second letter. Okay? So, Tashrat, Tashat is Tekiah, Shvarim Tekiah. Tarat is Tekiah, Trua Tekiah. So after Malchios, after Rabbi Abbahu's takkanah, this is stage 3. 1 Tashrat, 1 Tashat, 1 Tarat after Malchios. 1 Tashrat, 1 Tashat, 1 Tarat after Zichronos. 1 Tashrat, 1 Tashat, 1 Tarat after Shofarot. So now you have your major quantum leap. You've now gone to 30. See how you get 30? Because Tashrat counts as 4. Tashat counts as 3. Tarat counts as 3. So it's 4, 3, 3. That's 10. So it's 10 after Malchiot, 10 after Zichronot, 10 after Shofar. The Ramban actually says, if you're thinking about this carefully, the Ramban says that's actually a miscount, because if you're doing Shvarim Trua, because you're defining it as a Trua, the Shvarim Trua should not be counted as 2, it should be counted as 1, because essentially it's your definition of Trua, which means instead of 30, you actually should only have 27, but for purposes of our count, we do count them as 30. Okay, so this is stage 3, gone from 9 to 30. Okay, this is the major movement. Now, let me share with you a very fascinating tshuva of Rav Hai Gaon. Rav Hai Gaon was the last of the Gaonim around the year 1000, and many consider him to be the greatest of the Gaonim. He was the Rebbe of Rabbeinu Gershom, who was the Rebbe of Rashi. Again, if you go through these Kufot, the Babylonian Gaonim that had very, very absolute authority over the Jewish communities. Rav Hai Gaon was the last. The Babylonian communities were destroyed. And then we reached the age of the Rishonim in Europe, in France, in Germany, later Poland, Russia. So Rabbeinu Gershom is considered to be the first of the Rishonim, basically. Maybe Rabbeinu Gershom's Rebbe who's kind of an unknown figure, but extremely important. Sir Leone, he goes by. But whatever it is, very enigmatic. But Rabbeinu Gershom was the first well-known Rishon. Rav Hai Gaon is the last of the Gaonim. And Rav Hai Gaon has an interesting tshuva where he raises the question, before Rabbi Abbahu, different communities were blowing shofar different ways. Now, how could that be? This was a mitzvah that Jewish people were practicing since the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. Is it possible that 2/3 of OUisrael were making a mistake? Because if you have 3 variations, and 1 is right and 2 are wrong, that means whichever one is right, 2/3 of the Jewish people are not doing the mitzvah properly. Is that at all possible? And how does such an uncertainty enter our religious life? So Rav Hai Gaon says a very big chiddush. He actually says the Torah allows all 3 forms, meaning the Torah says you got to have a crying sound. And it left it to Kehilot to pick whatever crying sound they thought was appropriate. So it's not an issue that some people were right and some people were wrong. All variations were halachically acceptable. Rabbi Abbahu, however, wanted to abolish disunity on Rosh Hashanah, so he said we combine all the variations. But it's not, as people might assume, that we had a halachic doubt what was the right one, and Rabbi Abbahu said, let's resolve the doubt. Now, the emes is, Rav Hai Gaon, of course, great, great prestige. The truth is, the way the Rambam describes Rabbi Abbahu's takkanah, the Rambam seems to say there was a bona fide halachic uncertainty that Rabbi Abbahu wanted to resolve. So you do have the question, how did that uncertainty get introduced? But of course, that's a question with a lot of things. Consider tefillin. Rashi, Rabbeinu Tam, 2 absolutely different orders of tefillin in which each one says the other version is pasul. How did that start, right? So apparently there were, in the course of time, uncertainties in the system. The Rambam understood that shofar would be the same. If anything, shofar might be more understandable because shofar is once a year. Tefillin was every day. That's harder to understand in some ways. Okay, so we've gone now 3 stages. We've gone from 9 kolot, not connected to musaf. Then we've gone to 9 kolot connected to the musaf. And then we've gone from 9 to 30 based on Rabbi Abbahu's takkanah. And now you understand why. I hope you can understand why when you blow after Malchiot, you don't do 3 tashrats. You do one of each, because you have to have a tekiat, trua tekiat, once after Malchios, once after Zichronos, once after Shofros. And Rabbi Abbahu's takkanah is that you got to have every variety of trua. That's why you got to do it different. Tashrat, tashat, tarat. Not tashrat, tashrat, tashrat. That wouldn't make sense in that context. Okay. Stage 4. The introduction, post-Mishnah, the introduction of tekios before musaf. And these are given a name. They are called tekios demiyushav, sitting down tekios, miyushav. Now, all of us know that we stand up, right? So why are they called sitting down tekios? Because since they're not connected to the tfilat amidah, you actually are allowed to sit down if you need to. If someone has difficulty standing, they're allowed to sit down for those tekios demiyushav. The tekios in musaf correspondingly acquire the name tekiot dima'umad, because they are part of the standing prayer of Shemona Esrei. So tekios demiyushav came much later than tekios dema'umad. In fact, I don't believe they were called tekios dema'umad until tekios demiyushav came in, so then they got two names. But miyushav is stage number 4. Why were tekios demiyushav introduced? There are two reasons. One is a pragmatic reason, and one is more of a mystical reason. The pragmatic reason was for the benefit of the elderly or the weak who would not be able to stay for a prolonged musaf service. And if the only time the shofar was blown was in the musaf davening, they would miss the precious mitzvah of shofar. So a takkanah was made that will do a whole shofar blowing before. Now, that has to be 30 by definition, meaning theoretically, if you took out Rabbi Abbahu, tekios demiyushav would have been 9. But by the time tekios demiyushav came on the scene, you already had Rabbi Abbahu's takkanah. So therefore, the tekios demiyushav are going to be 30. But what's interesting is, I'm sorry, let me give you the other reason. I said there were two reasons. So reason number 1 for tekios demiyushav is the practical reason for people who could not stay for musaf. There is more of a mystical reason that the Gemara itself gives, and that is the tekios demiyushav are ma'arbev es hasatan. They confuse and confound the satan. Now, the Gemara does not explain what that means, so a few words of explanation. First of all, keep in mind that in biblical Hebrew, Satan is not a proper noun. It's not a name called Satan. Ha-Satan is a job description. Ha-Satan means the accuser. Essentially, the Satan is the district attorney. The Satan is the prosecutor. And the Satan is not, unlike Christian theology or Christian mythology, that talks about Satan as a fallen angel that rebels against God and was thrown out of heaven and becomes the Antichrist. Right? That's the whole idea there, the war against God. The Satan is a member of God's heavenly court. Satan has a job. Remember, again, this is a metaphor, but the image is God is judge, and there are defense attorneys, and there are prosecuting attorneys, and Hashem Kaviyachal has to hear the case. Our mitzvot and our masim tovim are the defense attorneys, and the Satan's job is to be a prosecutor, like in the book of Job, book of Iyov, right? Hashem says, oh, Iyov is such a righteous person. And the Satan says, well, he's not so righteous. Maybe he's righteous because he always gets a good deal from you. Let's start taking things away. So the Satan is a prosecutor. And on Rosh Hashanah, like every other day of judgment, his job is to make a case against us in various ways. And the shofar, one of the symbols of the shofar is it is a call to judgment. Now, normally if you're a criminal defendant, you want to delay your trial as much as possible. You're always looking for delays. But here we're blowing the shofar earlier than we have to, before Musaf. It's as if we're eagerly asking Hashem, we're ready for judgment. We're ready to go to court. The Satan gets a little confused. Gee, why are they ready? They must have some mitzvah up their sleeve. Okay, we don't really understand this process so well, but this is the meaning of la'arbev esa satan. Okay, so again, what are our stages so far? We started with 9, which were freestanding. The 9 would then move to Malchiot, Zichronot, and Shofrot. That is as far as the Mishnah went. We then have takkanahs Rabbi Abbahu, which was only in the Musaf originally, that you go from 9 to 30. And stage number 4 is later in the Gemara, after Rabbi Abbahu's takkanah, Tekiat dimiyushav. Now, since the main mitzvah of shofar is the mu'umad, actually, even though we make the bracha all the way at the beginning, that is the source of the well-known halacha, which not everybody does agree with, that you're not supposed to talk from the first bracha of the shofar till after all of the blowings, because all of them are the mitzvah. Now, let me say one second. Now, let me just raise a very simple question. You will notice in the miyushav, we don't blow it in the same way as the mu'umad. In the miyushav, we get 30 by blowing 3 tashrats, which is 12, then 3 tashats, which is 9, and 3 tarats, which is 9. Meaning, we don't blow tashrat, tashat, tarat, and do that 3 times. Rather, we blow 3 tashrats, 3 tashats, 3 tarats, right? Not like the way we do it. And the answer is very simple. In Musaf, I got to have 1 of each, because my chiyuv is to blow a tekiah, true a tekiah, after malchios, so I got to do all 3 variations. Here, my chiyuv is to blow tekiah, true a tekiah 3 times, and I got to do it in 3 ways. But once I'm doing one way, I finish that way, and then I go on to the other way. In other words, I blow 3 tashrats, because maybe trua is shvarim trua. I blow 3 tashats, because maybe trua is shvarim. I blow 3 tarats, because maybe trua is trua. In other words, the idea of different types only applies when your chiyuv is to do 1 of each, after malchias, zichronos, and shofars, not when you're doing 3 of each. You might as well finish what you started. I'm sorry, do you want to say?
The Miyushav is or isn't still connected to the Malchiyot?
No, it actually is not. It actually is not, because it's a separate thing. And that's why the order could be different. Okay. So, how many shofar blowings do we have after stage 4? So we either have 60 or 90, depending on how you count. If you follow the normal Nusach Ashkenaz, that in Malchiot, Zichronot, and Shofrot, you only blow in the repetition, so you only have 60, because you had the 30 of Miyushav and the 30 of the Mu'man, so that's 60. If, on the other hand, you follow the Hasidic minhag and many Svardim of blowing in the repetition as well, blowing in the silent as well, you actually have 90, because you have 30 of Miyushav, 30 in the silent, Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros, and 30 in the repetition. So, after stage 4, depending on what minhag you followed in the Seder HaBrachot idea, you either have 60 or 90. Okay, we now come to stage 5. Stage 5 is the latest stage in Tekiat Shofar, and it is not even in the Gemara. It is not even in the Gemara. It is absolutely post-Talmudic. And although it is virtually universal today, not everybody agreed with it. And that is a minhag. It is a minhag, which became a din, but it was a minhag, that we should hear the shofar 100 times on Rosh Hashanah. Mea kolot. This is not in the Gemara at all. But the Orach was Rav Nassan Baal HaOrach. The Orach was the first Jastrow. The Orach was in the generation before Rashi, and he wrote a Talmudic dictionary of difficult terms. And because the Orach was a Rishon, in his definitions, the Rishonim drew halachic conclusions from his definitions. So the Orach is considered to be a posek as well by virtue of his dictionary. But the Orach mentions the custom of 100 kolot, and this was picked up by many kehilot. It was not universal at the time, although today I believe it is universal. And the idea of the 100 kolot was based on a teaching about the mother of Sisra. Sisera was a Midianite general who wanted to destroy and defeat OUisrael. This was Devorah, fought against Sisera's armies, and Yael, a heroic woman, she killed Sisera. And in the Shiras Devorah, the Song of Devorah, Perek Dalet of Shoftim, so Devorah mentions how the mother of Sisera was crying and sobbing for her child, but not so much for the child, but where's the jewelry he's going to bring? Where's the fancy clothing, the spoils of war? And it says that she moaned or she cried 100 times. So we blow the shofar 100 times to counteract, to defeat the 100 cries of Sisera's mother. Now, what does that mean? I mean, Sisera's mother has not been alive for quite a few thousand years. What is it that we have to countermand? So here, there's an idea that's a bit controversial and unfortunately irrelevant even today. And that is, the cries of a mother elicit divine mercy, even when the child is a rasha, and even when the mother is a rasha. A mother's cries cannot be ignored. A mother's cries elicit mercy from God. Problem is, the mercy would be bad for us. In other words, she's emblematic of all of the Rishaim who may cry over their children. The Lamaisa, a lot of the Palestinian terrorists don't cry, they glorify it, but whatever it is. So we blow the shofar 100 times as if to say to God, God, look at our cries, look at our sobs. We want to, yes, they're crying and they also have a certain claim for some mercy. But if mercy to them is going to be used in evil and destructive ways, look at our crying. So we have to still defeat that cry of the enemy. So you now have to go to 100. So how do you get 100? So now it depends. If you follow the idea that you already have 90 by the time you finish Musaf, that you already have 90 by the time you finish Musaf, all you need is 10. Right? So in a Chabad minyan or whatever it would be, all you got to do is blow the shofar 10 times. 10 times is very simple. 1 tashrat is 4. 1 tashat is 3. 1 tarat is 3. That's it. Okay? If, however, you're a regular Ashkenazi, you got much more of a job to do because you've only done 60, 30 of Miyushav and 30 of Mu'umat. So you have a shortfall of 40. So how do you get your 40? So again, you blow 3 tashrats, after Musaf, 3 tashrats, 3 tashats, 3 tarats. That's 30. And that's done in the middle of Kaddish. And then after Kaddish, you blow 1 of each, 1 tashrat, 1 tashat, 1 tarat, and that will get you 100. I remember, I don't know why it hit me then. I had been going to shul before I came to Ner Yisrael, but when I came to Ner Yisrael as a 9th grader, and davening in yeshivas at least there, was very long. We didn't finish till like 4 o'clock. It was unbelievable. And, it's exhausting, especially if you're younger, if you're a kid. Kids have more energy for a lot of things, but long davening, they don't. A kid who can run around on a baseball field or a football field for like 6 hours, you see how dead they are in shul. It's just really, really hard. So finally, Musaf was over. Like 3:30, 3:45. And then all of a sudden, they start blowing the shofar again. And I don't know, I must have had that last year, the year before that as well, but somehow I said, what are they doing? They're starting over again or something. They're doing Musaf again. I wasn't sure what was going on. But Ashkenazim do have to blow 40 times. Now, that's how you get 100 kolos. So it's a fascinating mitzvah because of all of these different layers. You started with 9 and you wound up with 100. Now, the truth of the matter is, in reality, you actually hear the shofar more than 100 times because most of the time, the Baal Tokeya has to repeat things in different ways. So if that's the case, you might hear shofar 500 times, depending on the Baal Tokeya, but 100 is it. Now, there are two minhagim. The standard minhag is there is a makri. There is somebody who calls out, tekiah, trua, tekiah. And the way the Baal Tokeya gets the signal is that if he blew a tekiah that the makri, the Rav usually, did not consider acceptable, the Rav will not announce the next thing, so he knows he has to correct it, or sometimes he'll repeat tekiah again and the like. But in some places, because of the prohibition against hefsek, there is, and certainly if you're doing it in the silent, if you're doing it in the silent, there cannot be a makri. You can't announce it. So essentially, he just points his finger. He has his machzor in front of the Baal Tokeya. He puts his finger on tekiah and will not take off his finger to the next one until the proper sound is emitted. Yeah.
When you say it, the Sfardim in the middle of Shmona Esrei, you don't say Areshet.
You do not say Areshet Svasei. No, that's correct. You just blow the shofar. There is no makri, and you just listen and go on. All of the things that we say by the shofar blowing is only in the repetition, even among the Hasidim and Sfardim. Yeah.
Never heard it in the middle of Kaddish.
Yes, the reason why it's in the middle of Kaddish is the following. It's really because the Amida, the Chazaras Hashatz is not really finished till Tiskabel Salosan of Usahan. So even though our minhag is not to do it in the silent, but we want to at least bring it into the chelik of the Amida. So we actually do it in the middle of the Kaddish. So it's 30 in the middle of the Kaddish before Tiskabel, and then 10 afterwards. And the very last one is a Tekiah Gedola, a remez of Mashiach, and the like. One final thing. A woman technically is, strangely enough, exempt from the mitzvah of Tekiat Shofar because it is a time-bound commandment. And even though there are many exceptions to the rule, Shofar is not one of the exceptions. Shofar is a rule that a woman is exempt. And yet we do know that for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, it has been a minhag Yisrael that women try very much to hear shofar. If they come to shul, they come to shul. In fact, one of the reasons for miyushav was for women who couldn't stay for musaf. But most kehilos, Chabad or whatever it is, will arrange, private or later shofar blowings for women as well. So I just want to mention an interesting halacha that people are not always aware of. And that is, let's imagine I'm a Baal Tokeya, and I already was Yotzei. I blew shofar in shul. And now I'm blowing, well, could even be just blowing for my wife or blowing for women or the like. Who should make the bracha on the tekiah? So it is interesting that since if the man was already Yotzei, it is actually better for the woman to make the bracha. So she should make the bracha lishmoa kol shofar and even the shechiyanu. And then she can actually be the makri. If you have a makri, she can call out tekiah. Okay, that's up to how they want to work it out. But it would be permitted for the woman to be the makri. Now, if she can't make the bracha for whatever reason, the man could do it, but it is much better for the woman to make the bracha. So people should remember that. And the woman does not have to hear 100 kolot. The woman hears 30 kolot. Because once again, just like Malchiyot, Zechronot, and Shofar, there's only a chova and a minyan. Mea kolot is only a minhag on a minyan. So anyone that is hearing shofar blowing outside of a tefillah b'tzibor, their chiyuv is 9 d'oraisa, which because of Rabbi Abbahu's upgrade is going to be 30. So the chiyuv of everybody on Rosh Hashanah is to hear the shofar 30 times. Okay? Yeah.
I thought you could only be muktzah somebody else if they were the same level of obligation.
Yeah, so here's the thing. That only works the other way, meaning to say a person with a lower level of obligation cannot be motzi a person with a higher level of obligation. So that is why a woman could not blow shofar for a man. However, a man that has a chiyuv obligation could do it for a woman. So a woman could blow shofar for a woman, and a woman could blow shofar for herself. Meaning, let's say a woman knows how to blow shofar, right? No reason why she wouldn't. A woman can absolutely blow shofar for herself, And at least if you're Ashkenazi, she would make a bracha, because Ashkenazim take the position, whenever a woman does a mitzvah taseh shezman garama, she makes a bracha. So a woman could be motzi women, a woman could be motzi herself, but a woman cannot blow shofar for a man, and the reason is, it's not a sex thing, it's just a simple situation that you can only do a mitzvah for somebody if you are equal or greater obligation, and a woman is not obligated, so she could not say it for men. That's why, by the way, for mitzvot in which men and women are equally obligated, a woman could do it. A woman can make kiddush for a man, because when it comes to kiddush, men and women are equal. So any mitzvah where men and women are equally obligated, a woman can do it for a man. But shofar happens to be one of those mitzvot where a woman has a lower level of obligation.